Hi, it's me, and today I'm checking out one of the most interesting new cameras Fujifilm have put out for a long... actually no, they put out pretty adventurous new cameras quite often, to be fair. Fujifilm are playing Panasonic and Sony at their own game today by releasing a new camera that's specially designed for video content creators of all kinds, while still being a handy little stills camera. Here is the diminutive, but still quite powerful, X-M5. What can it do? Is it just a gimmick? Or is the quality truly there to back up Fujifilm's vision? Find out in this full review. In the X-M5 we are getting one of Fujifilm's smallest new cameras, not to mention their least expensive, at only $799 for the camera body only, or $100 more with the image stabilized 15 to 45mm kit lens. Very useful for video work, but not the sharpest option for stills photography. But despite the low price, the camera is packed with features. It has Fujifilm's classic 26MP X-Trans sensor, which has always been a good performer and will be much better for video work than Fujifilm's rather noisier 40MP sensors. Unfortunately though, it's not image stabilized, so for handheld work you should consider using an image stabilized lens or an electronic gimbal. Well, Fujifilm had to cut costs somewhere, I suppose. For video work, it does at least have a few digital stabilization options, though more on those later. For stills work, the camera shoots in JPEG or HEIF modes, or in RAW, of course, compressed, uncompressed, or lossless compressed. The camera features excellent AI-powered subject detection autofocus, which is unusual to see in a lower budget camera. The camera's AI is very good at finding your subject, although, like others, it can be fooled of course, sometimes getting a little stuck, as you can see here, and it's not quite as confident as Canon, Sony or Nikon's systems, but it's getting close with generally fast, accurate focusing, which is quite simple to use. An interesting and impressive feature is that the camera can shoot 6.2K resolution open gate video internally, giving you a nice 3:2 aspect ratio, potentially useful for cropping your footage, as well as up to 240 frames per second in 1080p resolution. You get a huge range of shooting modes and bit rates all in between, including lower and higher bit rates, H.264 and H.265 shooting, F-Log shooting for extra dynamic range, and Blackmagic RAW video shooting if you attach it to an appropriate Blackmagic external recorder. For stills work, this thing can shoot still images at up to 8 frames per second with its mechanical shutter, or up to 30 frames per second with the electronic shutter, albeit with a crop. So loads of powerful features there, and all packed into a camera with a lovely compact size and light weight at under 500 grams or 17.6 ounces. It looks pretty cool aesthetically too, with Fujifilm's attractive retro body design. The camera has a good focus on audio recording too. Its 3 microphones on top are somewhat effective in helping you choose what sound to emphasize when you're recording, in front, behind, in front and behind, or all around. If you want to use an external microphone, then there's a 3.5mm jack on the rear, cleverly placed above the screen where it can keep as out of the way of everything as possible. Well, let's take a further little look at the camera's build quality and handling. You can tell it's made out of plastic in your hand by the way it feels, but actually the camera still feels solid enough. We don't get Fujifilm's normal auto manual focus switch on the front this time. You have to switch between auto and manual focus in the menus. On the top at the left, we get Fujifilm's film simulation selection dial, which I happen to love, although I know they're mildly controversial to some people. As you turn it, you can see on the screen exactly what modes you're choosing, and in the camera's menu you can customize it a little and choose filter effect options for the black and white at cross mode, as you can see. Then on top we get a hot shoe surrounded by the 3 microphones, but there is no built-in flash. That's followed by a mode selection dial where there are some neat things going on. Firstly, you get instant access to vlog mode with a handy, updated user interface. Loads of video options can be tweaked using the touchscreen here, making this camera very user-friendly for beginner content creators. The defocus background function will work best with a brighter aperture lens attached to the camera, obviously, but admittedly, a nice feature of the 15 to 45mm kit lens option is that lens is image stabilized and features electronic zooming, controllable from the touchscreen itself, although you don't have a very good range of speeds to play with here. Also helpful is a product priority mode for focusing onto a product you might be holding in front of you to demonstrate. Very handy. We also get controls for autofocus as well as the portrait enhancer mode. Oh, and there's a 9x16 short movie mode too. It only records at 1080p, so you're better off really shooting normally but just holding your camera in portrait position, but admittedly for video recording that does feel a bit unnatural, so I can imagine a few content creators reverting to the 9x16 mode. If you choose to shoot in normal video mode instead of vlogging mode though, then there is still plenty of touchscreen functionality for you, including zooming in and out if you own a power zoom Fuji lens, of course. Anyway, back to the mode dial. Handily, it has 4 custom settings for those who like to, well, customize their settings, and for a camera with a much simpler control layout than normal, that is an important feature. Also, on the top right, we have 2 control dials, the front one of which can be pushed inwards to switch between adjusting aperture or f-stops, ISO or film simulation settings, which seems pointless considering the big film simulation dial on the left side of the camera. Well, this button can be customized to control other things too though in the camera's menus, and the top dial can be customized also, as well as other controls on the body. Next to that, we have the camera's worst feature in my opinion, a very fiddly and awkwardly placed quick menu button. I'm not sure why they didn't just put that on the rear of the camera. It's a pain to use for sure, but at least the quick menu as usual is highly customizable. On the top left, we have the drive mode button for still shot, panorama, multiple exposure, bracketing, and higher speed still shooting modes, and helpfully it tells you quite clearly what your options are here. I found the camera's buffer to hold quite a lot of still shots before giving out. I think it's something like 150 JPEGs, well, depending on the speed of your memory card that is, and I think it's about 30 raw files. And the buttons on the back are very sparse indeed. Thankfully, we do get a small autofocus point joystick here, which also navigates your menus, and also the AEL/AFL button can be customized to all kinds of different functions, including being an AF on button, which I know a lot of still shooters really need. Something else you'll notice about the camera immediately is that lack of an electronic viewfinder. Honestly, they are very useful, but it makes sense as a cost-saving measure. Even on a bright, sunny day, the screen is mostly bright enough for shooting with. The screen itself has 1.04 million dots, which isn't the highest resolution available, but it's more than good enough in this price range. It is a fully articulated screen, as you can see here, which is very helpful for video work, but takes a little longer to fold out if you're just doing some quick still photography. When it is opened out, you can see a mount on the camera body for one of Fuji's cooling fans, which will reduce overheating times when shooting video. During my testing, I did manage to get the camera to overheat by shooting at 6.2K at the maximum bitrate for about 28 minutes, and then it automatically shut off. So overheating isn't a huge issue, but it might be if you really want to shoot a lot of 6.2K footage. On the side of the camera, we have a 3.5mm headphone jack, as well as a micro HDMI output and a USB-C port for charging and for data transfer. If you have Fujifilm's X app on your phone, then it can download your pictures and video footage directly and quickly. I personally prefer that to trying to establish shaky wireless connections, but then again, I'm a bit old-fashioned that way. The camera can also work as a USB webcam, which is extremely useful. On the bottom of the camera, we get a compartment for its small battery, which can power it through about 350 shots or a bit over 80 or 90 minutes of video shooting, depending on your settings of course. We also get a single SD card slot, which is UHS 1 speed only. That is a little slower than I like to see, but then again, most cameras in this price range are of that speed. A natural disadvantage of the position of the battery and card compartment is that it's impossible to change the camera's battery or memory card while mounted onto a tripod, but that's only natural on such a small camera body. Also, I found that the battery compartment sometimes unintentionally opens while I was shooting stills. Maybe it's just the shape of my hand brushing against the clasp the wrong way. The battery never fell out or anything. It snapped in quite securely there, but nevertheless, a firmer locking mechanism might have been beneficial. The camera's other features include a portrait enhancement mode, pre-shot burst mode for sports photographers shooting in electronic shutter mode, an interval timer for time-lapse photography, flicker reduction, well, honestly, simply loads of features here. Overall, the camera obviously has a very nice aesthetic look and solid enough build quality, although I don't know how well weather sealed it is. It's got tons of features, many especially useful for vloggers, but regular still shooters and video makers will be fairly satisfied as well. It's lacking an EVF, built-in flash and sensor stabilization, although at this lower price point you do have to accept some compromises. It could have done with 1 or 2 more physical control buttons, I think, though, and a repositioned quick menu button too. As it is, it works fine as a stills camera, but having to press that front command dial to toggle between adjusting aperture and ISO does make it a bit slower to shoot with than more professional models, of course. Anyway, this is a full review, so let's check out the still image quality, followed by video quality in a couple of minutes. The camera's 26 megapixel X-Trans sensor is an older type now, but still very reliable. When it comes to sharpness and detail, here's a raw image on the left, a JPEG with default sharpening in the middle, and a JPEG image with minimum sharpening on the right. The raw image is capturing loads of fine detail here, which is quite lovely to see. The JPEG with default sharpening is, well, it's wildly over-sharpened, to be honest, as you can see. It gives you a punchy image for sure, but we're also losing a ton of detail due to blooming on contrasting edges. The picture on the right, a JPEG with sharpening turned down to -3, is by far my favourite. It preserves lots of detail from the raw file and leaves you with a lovely, natural-looking image, which you can always sharpen up in post, which will probably end up looking better than the camera's inbuilt sharpening. Anyway, let's see about high ISO noise performance. From the minimum ISO of 160 up to ISO 800, everything looks fine. At ISO 1600 though, we get a clear deterioration in fine detail and some visible noise. ISOs 3200 and 6400 are both looking rough in their fine details, but still just about usable. It's at ISO 12800 that image quality is just too far gone. So that's a fairly average performance for an aps-c sensor here when it comes to image noise, but I shouldn't neglect to mention that something I've always liked about Fujifilm's X-Trans sensors is the quality of that image noise. When you don't push your ISO levels too far, then it can look very filmic and natural in a way that's actually quite appealing. I do think it looks better than that from a regular Bayer sensor. When it comes to dynamic range, it's a good enough performance here for an aps-c sensor. You can bring those raw shadows up reasonably well. They'll show noise for sure, but you do still have a good amount of room to play with. Next, video quality. Let's start with that cool OpenGate 6.2K video quality that's just begging for you to crop into it when video editing. The footage looks great, in my opinion. Plenty of detail being captured, and the footage only really starts to begin picking up noise and losing detail at ISO 1600. As you can see here, even ISO 3200 is still looking fairly good. It's at 6400 that the footage starts getting a bit too grainy, and 12800 is looking really bad. Honestly though, a great performance there for an aps-c camera. Alright, let's see about 4K footage at 25 frames per second. 4K is looking fairly good too. It's by no means the sharpest 4K footage I've ever seen, but good enough, and again, surprisingly low on noise up to ISO 1600. ISO 3200 starts to lose a lot of fine detail, but noise is still under control. ISO 6400 and 12800 both look really quite soft now. It seems the camera is performing some very heavy noise reduction, smoothing out the footage at the cost of fine detail, which is probably quite a wise choice from Fujifilm in a camera of this kind. And finally, here's the 4K footage at 60 frames per second. At the base ISO, it's softer than at slower frame rates, but still usable, even up to ISO 1600. ISO 3200 and beyond just become dreadfully soft now, so don't try and crop into that footage. Still, the X-M5 is producing some nice video quality here, low on noise and with a good amount of detail at lower ISOs, and without any weird surprises. Oh, and here's the camera's 240 frame per second 1080p mode. In common with similar modes on other Fujifilm cameras, in some areas of the image it looks nice, but we're getting quite a lot of pixelation on contrasting edges, as well as some moire, which you can clearly see on the zip of my coat here. It's usable at a pinch though. When it comes to rolling shutter, this camera suffers from it at all resolutions and all frame rates in video mode, from 6.2K to 4K and even down to 1080p, I'm afraid, although it does look a tiny bit better at 1080p. I have seen even worse rolling shutter than this before, but not much. And here's some vlogging footage for you, shot at 15mm with that kit lens. First, without any image stabilization at all, pretty shaky of course. Now, with the optical stabilization of the 15 to 45mm lens only, and now with optical and with the camera's digital stabilization, where you can see there's quite a crop being applied, and it's still pretty shaky footage still, to be honest, although it might look better with an even wider angle lens than 15mm, and if you're just tilting or panning your footage and not walking too heavily, then the digital stabilization actually looks okay. Alright, that's about all I've got to say about this one. The Fujifilm X-M5 has to be one of the most affordable hybrid cameras on the market today. While it may be missing a few features, and I'm primarily thinking of an electronic viewfinder here and in-body image stabilization, that X-M5 is jam-packed with pretty much everything else you could really need in such a small camera at this lower price point, including a ton of video features, fantastic subject detection autofocus, and that classic Fujifilm X-Trans picture quality. I was particularly pleased with the camera's video quality and cool 6.2K open gate shooting. More serious professional video makers and stills photographers will of course want a bigger camera with more controls to get their hands around it for quicker work. But for $800, content creators will be pretty delighted with this thing. It's possibly the neatest camera of this year. In fact, I'm sure it is. So obviously it has to come highly recommended. I've been testing cameras and lenses for years now, but I'm as happy as ever, because new products like these always keep things interesting. Thanks for watching everyone, and a special thanks to my Patreon supporters. They get special exclusive content, and of course a warm, happy feeling deep inside for helping to keep these tests and reviews coming along sponsorship free. Link in the description below, and ciao for now everyone.